Okay, welcome to Masters of Podcasting. I'm Conley.
I'm Melissa.
And today we're going to be talking about episode 2, Kyrie Eleison.
This was I don't want to call it a slow episode. I guess I really will call it a table-setting episode in the strictest sense of the word. Not to denigrate the episode, because I thought it was really good. I really liked it, but I noticed that a lot of commenters kind of had the feeling that this was a little bit slow, maybe because it didn't have the intense sex that the previous episode did.
Well, I guess everybody's disappointed because we have seen very few glimpses into the hotel room, which, fair. But, I don't know, this episode, it didn't upset me at all that it was slower, mainly because I always enjoy those table-setting episodes where all these little puzzle pieces get laid out. I just like trying to figure out where they're going to lead, so I really had no problems with it.
Me neither. I think more so after I've had a chance to process it and realize that given the vague reviews and all the talk that we've heard about how great next week's episode is going to be, I think we're really going to appreciate this one much more after episode 3 airs. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. First, we're going to talk a little bit kind of about the theme of this episode, and we're going to talk about which characters kind of came out ahead and which ones suffered, the need to escape, and kind of what role that table-setting act plays, we think, or I think anyway. I guess both of us think, moving forward from here. And then we're going to talk about random thoughts.
Well, the theme that we came up with for this episode was that everyone thinks they know better than everyone else. Essentially, you have people trying to be the driving force behind another person's life. And
it's really all about the personal context because, in a sense, everyone is right in a very, very subjective, narrow sense. They're all right based on their own personal experiences and what they bring to the story and the table based on their own lives and their own opinions and how others have influenced them.
Well, I think, too, this is an episode where most of the people who are making these choices and actions, their instincts are good. You know, they're close to honing in on what's important, if not already there. So it's not like other episodes where it's like one Bill wants to do X and Jenny wants to do Y, and they are both so terribly wrong, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think in this episode, mostly everybody's kind of focused on the similar goals or on the same goal. The way that it manifests is so different and so interesting depending on the character.
It's all those life experiences. Everybody's lives are just a little bit different, and they all just bring something slight, just slight variations on it to the table, and that produces strife throughout the episode.
Well, do you want to start with Jenny and Bill in the hotel?
Sure. So we start out with, I thought this was a really great beginning. You hear Jenny's voice in the distance just going through like a litany of problems that she suffered throughout the day, and Bill is sitting there fidgeting like he's having to listen to his wife after he comes home from a long day at work, and she's droning on about this and that. But he is invested in what she has to say because she is acting as his girl Friday back at maternity hospital. It is fun to see them kind of putting together this background caper, like their little plot to go through and find the files that they need and figure out what's up with Barton. It was nice because they work together, and he's not just instructing her, go and find me these files and then bring them back and then I will decide what we're going to do next. It was very much a conversation between the two of them.
Well, and I know that we were probably both slightly disappointed that it didn't turn out to be some Ocean's 11 caper.
Oh, yeah.
It was a nice little reframing of their usual dynamic, especially because Bill gets to express a lot of this surprise and be, I would say, more delicate socially than we've ever seen him, while Jenny is just aggressive and wanting to make decisions and really ready to lay out the next 10 steps.
Yeah, she comes to this and just displays all this and it's not like it's sudden or uncharacteristic for her, it's just that it's very open and out there in a way that we've never really seen from her before. Normally, when she's assertive, I think the audience's reaction tends to be, wow, go Jenny, go, fight the good fight and get out there and do stuff. But here, even Bill, who is not the most socially smooth person, is kind of sitting there going, okay, you need to take a step back because, we can deal with this in a way that does not involve you going in and pissing everyone off up at Memorial. And he kind of tries to start reining her in a little because she just goes off a little bit.
Well, it's kind of funny how really unsuccessful he is because, he's obviously trying to recognize that she does have a valid point, but at the same time, she's so wound up with making sure that he doesn't forget that she's part of this study amid all of these attempts by other people either to push her out or to not include her at all. I don't know, I found it really funny, the way that she was suggesting, going about this, because if he doesn't speak to Great House, she's just going to go around it and get it done through this, strange new secretary.
It's almost like Bill is going, okay, Ginny, I really understand and appreciate that you want to get this done, but please do not do something that is going to, wind up with me being out of a job.
Yeah, please don't blow up my career at Memorial on my second day.
Seriously. But I think what surprised me the most was even after, she is pissed off that Great House doesn't recognize her. She's very outraged. And rightfully so, of course, but she has this reaction like, how dare they not recognize me? I put all this work into this. You put my name on the study. I'm part of this. And it's almost as though the logical next step on any other show would have been for her to be like, well, I'm so mad. I don't want to go upstairs. I don't want anything to do with this right now. I need to go and just be angry and in a little snit. But Ginny's response is to pick up the key and just say, all right, we're going upstairs right now.
And that's what made me laugh in this scene because, she lays out her arguments and her basically options for action, and Bill's kind of like, no, please God, no, let me try this. And then the next thing is her being like, well, we have a plan, come upstairs with me, and he's kind of watching her like, so that's what's going on.
She's got this get inside me thing going, like, all right, here it is, we're going now.
Well, I think he was pretty into that too, judging by the end of that scene.
Maybe that's just me, but the next I think it's the next scene, the next morning, he comes out and suddenly finds Coral there, and I sort of got the impression that Bill slept in a little bit late, like he got taken around the block a couple times the night before.
Jenny had some feelings to work out about some stuff.
She had some rage issues to work out. So the rest of these people who know better than other people, or people who think they know better than other people. So Ginny thinks that she knows how to handle these social situations and this finesse better than Bill does, and Bill is not too sure that she does. And then we move into Great House knowing better than Bill about his job for the sake of money and pleasing the donors.
Well, and that's what I thought was interesting, because I thought it was a nice hat trick that not only does Bill, leave maternity and go to a new hospital, but he doesn't automatically become god of this new hospital. That I thought that was a nice touch with him sort of being under the thumb of a new boss and a board who doesn't know him or doesn't trust him. And
I think it's an interesting difference between a university-run hospital like maternity, where the budget was always a problem, but it was getting money from the university. The university was almost like this unseen, invisible donor. But here, the donors are real people. They have real problems. They come to the hospital with their health concerns, and it's this very one-on-one kind of aspect that we didn't get at maternity. And that's intriguing and a different take on the situation, I think.
And I think, too, Bill's been so used to an environment like maternity where, because it's university funded, they will do things that are, like you said, a little bit more out of the ordinary. They don't have to worry about one person with big opinions breathing down their necks. They're able to do more of the cutting edge research and procedures, whereas somewhere like Memorial, in my mind, is, I'm sure you get the same level of care or similar level of care, but it's not exactly wheeling and dealing in the operating room.
And you get more of an immediate sense that Bill is a practitioner. Because you see Rose, the first time she wakes up and he talks to her, there are all these other people in other beds around her who've come off of OR trips. And we haven't had this so far, not really anyway, this sense that Bill is an actual practicing doctor. He actually sees patients, and they're not always people that he's just irritated with or annoyed with because they're keeping him away from his study. He is a good doctor, and he actually manages to have a bedside manner, and a good one in this episode.
And I think this episode shows that, his choice of medicine as a profession it wasn't just, well, this would be an excellent career for me. I want to do this study. It does frame it as more of a calling or something that he felt compelled to do for personal reasons, not just, well, I'm smart, I can do this.
Right, exactly. And that, I think the real life Bill he almost became like an English professor. He was originally going to major in English, but he changed his mind and went into medicine instead.
He would have been one terrifying professor, though.
Little bit of trivia for anyone who hasn't read the biography. You totally should. It's really good. And then you would, I don't know, not be so annoyed when I go off on these tangents. So then, did you want to go on?
Oh, no, I was just going to talk a little bit more about Great House.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if they'd ever mentioned how long he had practiced. Because I remember they brought up with Scully that he was a doctor and he was an okay doctor, but then he did, administrative track. And so I'm trying to remember if we got any detail like that about Great House. And
I don't think we have. I don't think I want to know too much about Great House. He creeps me out for good reason, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care about his personal life, but that's one of the things that I'm interested in, especially because of this conflict where he's the person sitting in on Bill's surgeries and deciding, this is the way you get to practice. These are the ropes you're going to have to hang from until I tell you otherwise. Yeah,
Dr. Greathouse definitely does not think that the sun rises and sets with Bill the way that Barton did.
Oh, poor Barton.
We'll get into him. Let's see. Another example of someone who thinks that they know better than someone else is Rose's mother, thinking that she knows better than her daughter. This caused a lot of outrage on Twitter the night that this aired. People shocked that a young woman's parents had a say in her health future, in her bodily autonomy.
Welcome to the 21st century, folks.
Yeah, seriously. And then Bill knows better than Rose about how to help her nymphomania, which is, I think, the one central example of the person who knows better than someone else. And I think this episode really takes a sympathetic light of Bill and backs him up on that. He really does know that it's the best option, and he is willing to piss off his new boss and piss off a very important donor and just say, fuck it, we're going to do this instead.
Well, and I think, too, it's interesting, that whole argument, not just because of the parallels that we have with healthcare today, but because Bill and his reasons for doing the study were always motivated by this desire to end schools of thought like Rose's mother's. He wanted to bring things to light. He wanted people not to be ashamed of themselves or be terrified that there was this thing that they couldn't control. So I think I like that they reframe the study in that way, because it really brings us back to the, not even necessarily the scientific core, but just the underlying moral code behind his drive.
And I think it's nice that he isn't treated with this sympathetic light by the episode because he knew about her sex addiction or her nymphomania right from the start. It was like he was always going to treat her like a patient worthy of his compassion and care. He didn't find out about her sexual dysfunction until halfway through the case. He was always going to be a good doctor to her. It wasn't just like, oh, you've got this thing that's related to my study. Suddenly my interest is perked up. Like it casts him in an even better light by doing that.
And I wonder too if it was purposeful that they set these episodes one right after the other, because we've seen Bill in the first episode just do so many terrible things and really act very badly. And here we actually have an episode where he does pretty well. I'd say 95% of the time.
Yeah, he does really well. He does come out very well. I'm just going to keep going through this list of people who know better than other people. Vivian cuts down Ginny pretty harshly. She throws some pretty heavy shade on her. But
stone cold.
Yeah, it was pretty cold. But at the same time, even though it was pretty dramatic and very emotional, she very accurately assessed, I thought, Ginny's rampant, rabid ambitions.
Well, I think she correctly pegged Jenny as someone who is never satisfied with what she has. She, like you said, she's got these ambitions. She's always reaching for more. And because Jenny is so single-minded and so driven towards these other goals, she isn't paying attention to what she leaves scattered in her wake. Enter Ethan and Vivian.
Yeah, which is interesting because in the last season, we were supposed to see her as this perfect woman, this wonderful person who was so humanely connected to the subjects who came through the door. She could explain the study in layman's terms. She was just the most wonderful assistant. And here, when it comes to getting what she wants, she will trample all over everybody. Like, she did not even notice that Vivian was about to bite her head off because she was so busy trying to get her to fess up about her father.
Yeah, I mean, she came in with that agenda, I want the files, I want to talk to Scully, here is Vivian, the conduit to Scully. And so it was just, like you said, she's supposed to be so socially gifted, and at the same time, she was about 12 steps behind where I think most of us were when we saw Vivian walking down the hallway, and it was,
Hit the deck, here comes Vivian, she's pissed off.
Don't do it.
And then Ginny turns right around and takes charge of Lillian's public service announcement, her video, or her movie, I guess, her film, and her cancer treatment subsequently later in the episode. Ginny just kind of needs to be in charge of shit. I feel like that's just her whole impetus for existence.
Well, I think too, she feels like she hasn't been in charge and hasn't had her own agency for so long that now that she's got a little taste of what that's like, again, her ambition just runs wild and she's got to be in charge of all the things.
Mm-hmm. And then Austin, later on when he drags Ginny aside, he knows that, and he is right, Ginny needs a distraction, and he dances with her, and they have a nice little moment. I'm really enjoying the fact that they're friends now.
Yeah, I like this bro TP, personally.
Yes, definitely. And getting into one of the darker and very unpleasant aspects of this episode, Coral, the Master's new nanny, knows swaddling better than Libby does. Libby, who goes through Dr. Spock manual to figure out why the baby is crying. Coral just has this, I guess, innate experience.
The way that entire arc played out, I thought was fascinating because from the beginning we see Coral, physically positioned as the third wheel inside Bill and Libby's marriage, because they're putting on this front on her first day, like, honey, your shirt's hanging behind the door. No, honey, it's not. I looked. And so that sort of continues to where Libby feels like she has to bring someone over to her side, so she brings Coral in really close, and she completely overshares about her childhood and her marital problems and all of these things.
It's like the first day of this poor girl's existence with you, her job with you, and Libby doesn't seem to understand that there's a very fine line for Coral between employment and friendship, and she's having to, balance this out.
And I think, too, I just imagine poor Coral going out to the backyard for, like, a cigarette or for, 2 minutes to herself and just being like, my God.
Jesus Christ, what have I gotten into?
It was very poignant because, as we've seen, Libby doesn't have many friends. She just doesn't have anyone to talk to about anything in her life, and so she overdoes it, but then she almost pulls a Bill and punishes Coral, not only because Coral proves to be more adept with the baby, but also almost because she opened up this can of worms and then maybe regretted it the next day.
Yeah, I think it was more that she was trying to punish Bill through Coral, but really, man, Libby really took a nosedive in this episode. It's just her insatiable need for control of the situation because she can't get her husband to respond to this magic bullet fix that she thought would come. She's actually surprised. She has the gall to be surprised that Bill does not magically open up to her and magically accept this new child when she's pretty much known all along that he is ambivalent at best about the situation.
And it was funny to me, too, because she almost took all of her innate social gifts and just turned them on their heads. So, here's someone who she's always been able to smooth situations out, make sure that, these things don't make waves, and these are the ways that people can behave. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't care anymore. I'm going to do the complete opposite and see if I get more attention that way.
Interesting. Yeah, but she picks out the one thing that makes her feel superior to Coral and like she knows better than Coral and frames it as this, I'm being helpful, I'm trying to help you, and it's not helpful. Because if she thought they were going to be friends, they are definitely not friends now, and then, ugh.
And I remember before the season even aired, Caitlin Fitzgerald did an interview with, I think it was one of the local LA TV stations, and they showed that particular clip. And I just remember watching it and being like, holy crap. Like, what has gone on with Libby that she just does this complete turnaround?
Yeah.
Apparently all it takes is, several months of hidden resentment and Bill calling Coral competent.
The look on her face when he said that to her, I mean, she just looked like her whole skin was just crawling and buzzing with just pure rage.
Yeah, she looked like she wanted to run Bill over with a truck.
Yeah.
Let's see. Do we want to keep talking about Libby and Coral, or do we want to move on to talk about Betty?
Let's go. I just want to mention, this is the end of our little list, but Betty, at the end of the episode, knows better than Bill on how to make Rose feel better about herself, because she has the unique and rare opportunity to get to sit and listen to Bill's office conversations all day without the disadvantage of being someone subordinate to him, like a secretary. So she can speak her mind and try to manipulate him and get in under his skin. She really does think that Bill's bedside manner is absolutely terrible, so she runs off to go find Rose herself. I think that's going to be a very interesting, fascinating dynamic to watch them go through, especially as it starts to change, because you get the feeling very early on, Betty it's like she wants something from Bill. I'm not totally sure what it is yet. Whoa.
Oh, there's cooking noises in the other room. Oh. Is that what you're hearing?
I heard like a stack of dishes fall or something. Sorry, it's not that it's really loud, it's just that it's loud enough to where I'm like, holy shit, there must be an earthquake or something.
No, it's just cooking noises.
Anyway, that made absolutely no sense what I just said. I'm excited to see the relationship between Betty and Bill develop as they sort of grow this burgeoning respect for one another and kind of empathy towards each other's situations in life.
I think, too, they're going to be surprised at how many commonalities they actually have. I was thinking this in the hallway when telling him, you have to go to that girl and talk to her, not knowing that that's already happened. And, he says something about he deals with real suffering, and she just says, you don't get to talk to me about suffering. Whatever suffering I've experienced, this makes everything here look like amateur hour. And I am intrigued to see if they go down that road at all, if they develop a personal friendship.
I am interested both in that. I think it would be really interesting is not the word I want. I use that way too often. I think it would be really cool if Betty were to see something that she wasn't supposed to. And I don't mean like Bill and Ginny getting hot and heavy in some exam room. I just mean like in the season 1 deleted scenes, there were a couple where Bill watches someone, and this is 2 different events, watches people inside the exam rooms from behind a double-sided mirror. Betty being in his office so much would just be, she's in a very rare situation where she can pretty much just come and go as she pleases, and she can get whatever she wants out of him, and he pretty much can't say boo. He can try to marginalize her as much as he wants, but she's this lofty, rich woman now, but she's still very real. So if she sees something, she's going to take it very differently than would, say, Margaret, who is a society debutante type. Like, it's this conflation of 2 attributes of her life that would make for a really good plot, is where I'm going with this.
Are you talking about just her fitting into society in general and not succeeding? Or maybe that intersection between her and Bill and their association at Memorial?
Yeah, I think so. I think the second one.
Okay.
Yeah. Because she's really wealthy, so he can't turn her down because that would look bad, even though they both know the reality of her situation. But at the same time, she speaks her mind. And if she sees things, it's going to mean more to the audience than it would if, say, Rose's mother happened to see something, if that makes sense. And not just because she's more of a recurring character.
No, that makes sense to me, especially because, obviously, they've spent a great deal of time together, and she, to this date, does not understand Bill completely well. She knows that he's driven by his study and by science, but as far as personal life, like you said earlier, she has really no clue about how good his bedside manner, for example, really is, when she goes to talk to Rose, and, Rose is telling her, oh, Dr. Masters already came and talked to me, and I feel a lot better, and she kind of looks at Rose like, I'm sorry, did an alien visit you?
There was one incident in this episode when she comes in and she brings him a prune Danish. That was wonderful. What did she expect to gain from bringing him a prune Danish? Like, she knows that he has to put up with her no matter what. She's got the $1 million check hanging over his head. It's not like she has to be nice to him, yet she feels compelled, but for some reason, to go above and beyond and bring him food and to try to be pleasant.
She wants him to like her, even though she's blackmailing him with her money and her connection to her very well-placed husband.
And doesn't that just seem strange? That seems kind of strange to me, and I want to know what her motivation is.
Maybe it could be just something as simple as that in her new life she doesn't have anyone who truly knows her, except for Bill Masters.
That's true.
Irony of ironies.
Let's move on and talk about winners and losers of this episode. Kind of people who came out ahead, people who suffered through their characterization as a result of this episode. Center and foremost, I think, is Bill. He's kind of the golden child of the episode. We really get to see him fully in action as a compassionate and very competent healer for the first time in this episode. And there's, what I mean by healer is sort of the Dungeons and Dragons version of it. Like, not a doctor, not a nurse, but sort of both of those things at the same time. A person who just comes in and they know what to do and they know how to handle it and they don't make a big fuss about it. Because that's very different from him being a doctor. He's always been very much a doctor in the past. And that carries all this cultural and social baggage about egotism and, I have to be the big man. And he kind of does that with Coral when he introduces himself. He corrects her. It's not Mr., it's Doctor. But when he's working with Rose, when he's working in the hospital, he's very empathetic, which is something that we've never seen with him and his patients before. But that makes sense that he would find it easy to be compassionate to strangers, essentially.
I think, too, it's easier for him to act on that in a hospital where no one knows him or knows, Bill Masters, Dr. Robot, as opposed to in maternity where, I am God of obstetrics. Everyone speaks my name with reverence.
That's true. It is kind of a fresh start for him in more ways than just the study.
I guess I just assumed that was why he felt so free to really express a lot of his more personal opinions when, maybe at maternity or in any other situation, he would have just been like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're not forcing me to do this. I just don't want to. As opposed to, this is morally wrong. This girl should be able to decide her own reproductive future.
Yeah, he really is the most qualified person among the persons who think that they know better than everybody else. He's the most qualified person to be giving advice in the first place, and on top of that, he acts in an ethical and upstanding manner.
2 for 2, Bill.
And I noted, I put in my notes, does Bill lie at all in this episode? He does at the very end when he's on the phone with Libby, but throughout the rest of the entire episode, he tells the truth and he is honest with people and he does the best work that he's done so far, that we've seen.
I think you see it too, I think especially in his conversation with Vivian, not just, in his role as doctor and patient, but with Vivian, you really get the sense that he has this capacity for empathy, that he is really making a choice and is concerned about health and welfare of others and not just clinically.
Yeah, because that was very clever of him to put it together that obviously she was lying about her tennis injury because he's known her. He's like her uncle. He would remember that she trounced her tennis instructor and had never been beaten since then. Of course she didn't break her arm playing tennis. And Bill would be the one person to put that together. He's observant. He figures it out.
I think I like that too, especially because with an event so huge as an attempted suicide, I think a lot of shows, the temptation is to hang that over the episode arcs as long as possible and just draw it out. When's Bill going to find out? When is the truth going to come to light? And instead, you just have Bill showing up like, okay, I saw you beat a grown man at tennis like 15 years ago. You definitely didn't get that playing tennis. Tell me the truth.
And it's the kindest way that he could have broached the subject with her. It's not just like showing up and demanding to know what happened. He's very kind about it, which is, again, very surprising because you would not think, given what he's done and who he's been up until this point in the series, you just don't expect it.
Well, and again, this is the kind of social dexterity that we've been told, or at least had hammered down our throats, that Bill, can't display. So when he is able to be that
finesse,
not necessarily, finesse, when he's able to broach this subject as delicately and as compassionately as we saw in the episode, it does stand out even more.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to Libby. I mean, we talked a little bit about this before. I noted that Libby is the most cast down person in this episode, I felt, because she assumes that she's going to be a natural mother and housewife just because she wants those things. She thinks, well, if I want them badly enough, that surely they will naturally come true, and my maternal instincts will kick in, and I will be perfect, and my house and my children will be perfect. And we see on Bill and Coral's first day at their new jobs, Libby's kitchen is an absolute disaster zone. It looks like she hasn't done dishes in a few days, and that's understandable as a new mother. But it does show that her expectations are not in alignment with reality in a very big way.
Well, and I think it proves, she imagined, when she imagined having her child, she imagined that it would be this peace bringer and that she would have the baby and Bill would fall into step and fall in love with it, and she would be this lovely golden mother, and just everything would really lock into place in a way that it never did before they had children. I think she just was not prepared for the dirty work of mothering and of caring for a small infant who can't do anything for itself.
Mm-hmm. There was one reviewer who got the impression that the tone of the scenes between Libby and Coral was like a camp counselor at a summer sleepaway camp and her favorite counselor in training. I could totally see that. Doting on her in a special way, and the instant that something goes wrong and someone higher up criticizes Libby, Bill has this authority and he turns around and criticizes Libby, boy, she has to lash out in the worst way possible.
Right, it's the chain of aggression.
It really is. It's a chain. So her racist microaggressions that come out of her frustration and struggle with Bill's disapproval of her whole need to have children and the child in the first place do not help her in any way. So she is pretty much at the bottom of the pile at this point. Then we have Ginny. Ginny, I felt like, was kind of a mixed bag this episode. She sees a lesson about herself. She gets told, but she doesn't actually put it into practice, and she kind of outright rejects the lesson that she's supposed to be learning. And it took me a while to realize why she goes in and doesn't do to Barbara what she threatened to do. I didn't quite piece it together because I was wondering, does she just feel sorry for her because Barbara seems so nervous and klutzy, and does it remind her of her first days working with Bill? Or does she look at Barbara and think to herself, my God, why would I want to go back to being Bill's secretary? But I think she gets this takedown from Vivian, where Vivian tells her, you don't understand the consequences of your actions. You don't think anything through. You do not see into the future the logical progression of events. And realizes that if she does this to Barbara, it's going to wreak havoc on this woman's life.
Well, and I guess I didn't really question that Ginny was coming fresh from her fight with Vivian, because she appears so radically different, not just because she's, in front of Barbara, who is just very lost on her first day, or because she and Bill are getting a little awkward and weird around each other. I just saw this sort of haunted look in her eyes as she's walking down that hallway, like, I just don't have it in me today, and I immediately just thought that Vivian was the reason why, because she's still reeling from being called, you'll be old and ugly and you'll die alone, essentially.
Yeah. But she gets that lesson from Vivian, you don't see the consequences of your actions, and then she goes right back to this general assumption that she can save Lillian through sheer good old-fashioned gumption and I guess I'm going to call it the we-us factor. Like, when Ginny says things, when she uses collective plural pronouns, she kind of takes on other people's causes and burdens, and she involves herself in a way that I don't think Lillian was really expecting, or that she really necessarily approves of. But
it's interesting, too, for Lillian that she doesn't necessarily fight it in any way.
That's true.
You know, because obviously, you know, Ginny comes in and says, I made an appointment with your oncologist. Deal with it. But at the same time, you know, an appointment can be canceled. Lillian is her boss. You know, she could at any point just say, no, I don't want to do it. I'm not doing this. You know, you can't be in this examination room with me. You know, you have Lillian actually allowing Ginny to do this, I think, because she, A, doesn't want to deal with the fact that she is dying and is close to losing her most important part, which is her intelligence and her brain function, along, you know, with her motor skills. But I think it's also, too, that Lillian not appreciates, I think that's the wrong word, but
acknowledges
and recognizes that, you know, for all the wrong ways that Ginny is going about this, at least it proves that she has someone in her corner.
Yeah, I think it's important that Lillian mentions that her mother ignored her as a child because Ginny steps up for her in a way. I think she's willing to allow all this to happen because, hey, it means somebody is paying attention.
Well, and it means, like you said, somebody's paying attention and that they actually care about what happens to her, not just, you know, on a business level, but on a personal level.
But at the same time, Ginny seems to think that if they just fight it, it'll go away. She's still not really looking toward the future, I feel like, because I think Lillian essentially has a death sentence on her head. I mean, is she just biding her time, trying to make things more comfortable? Is this like emotional palliative care, or does she, honest to God, think that they're going to be able to reverse it? And what about whether or not she goes back to work for Bill? Like, what's she going to do if, you know, Bill somehow makes it so that she can join him? What's she going to tell Lillian?
Yeah, I think it's not quite denial because she is acknowledging that Lillian has a serious problem that has to be dealt with, but it's almost a coping mechanism for a level of denial that she doesn't want to admit to.
Yeah.
It's almost, I guess, I'm thinking of the scene with Vivian where Vivian's telling Bill, you know, my mother said that Dad almost got fired and there's been a lot of stress at work and I just keep thinking, you know, sometimes you get heartsick and you forget that everyone cares about you. And so she's very upset and she obviously knows that there are emotional reasons behind Barton's suicide attempt. But then she comes out with, it could have just been an accident, right? You know, he just needs rest, right? And I think this is Ginny's equivalent of that line of thinking where it's like your cancer is affecting you on a very primal level. But if we research it hard enough, somehow we will know something different and you will be okay.
Yeah. So let's see. The other character that I feel like really makes some forward movement, or at least some kind of change, is Betty. She really learned something here. She has her own kind of clumsy way of offering up life advice, and it's played for laughs, of course. But I think it's a contrast because she barges into Rose's room like it's the last ditch effort to make this poor girl feel better about herself, and even with like her mangled explanation and her kind of horrific story, that she still thinks that this is going to be somehow better than whatever Bill Masters would have to say given the same situation.
Well, and I like too that it was almost panicked. She's just so intent on making sure this girl knows you're not a whore. You know, your mom may call you that, but there's a better life ahead of you, essentially. And she finds hilariously that she's been beaten to the punch. Yeah. You know, she's supposedly, you know, they started out the dynamic with Betty, the socially gifted one, and Bill, the idiot with a clipboard. And now, all of a sudden, the student has become the master, apparently.
Yeah, it's spectacular. She really, you know, he holds the door open for her after the John recognizes her in the hallway. You know, you can start to see that glimmer of, you know, not grudging exactly, but sort of reluctant respect pass from him to her, and she sees past the mask for the very first time. And it could be that she's crying there at the end of her monologue to Rose because it's been so a kind of emotional upheaval to relive the fact that she blinded her own mother because her mother, you know, did nothing but make her life hell. But at the same time, you get the feeling that it's a little bit because she realizes that Bill has stepped up to the plate in a big way that she didn't realize possible, and that maybe if she had been in a privileged position, he might have, or she just kind of gets a very real reminder that he is a doctor and he does actually concern himself with the health and well-being of other people.
Yeah, I think she never really considered he had that emotional investment in being a doctor, that he looked at his patients the same way he looks at people for the study, which is facts and figures.
Yeah. Okay, so this is getting a little bit long, but we're going to go on anyway.
Let's do it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about escape, kind of the concept of and theme of escape throughout this episode, because Dr. Greathouse mentions something called Fleurs du Mal, when there's that horrifying scene where it cuts back and forth between Greathouse and Bill and Dr. Dittmer and Ginny. At the very end, Dr. Greathouse mentions this, it's a collection of poetry written by Baudelaire in the 1850s. And what it is focused on is the tension and struggle between what Baudelaire calls the ideal and the spleen. And the spleen is an organ in the body that was traditionally understood to filter out bad things. So the spleen is kind of ill content or malaise in a way. So the poetry was banned, and Baudelaire was actually fined after a court case for obscenity or something like that, because some of his poems were considered so extreme in the 1850s. But the whole cycle kind of concerns itself with a narrator who longs for a fantasy escape. He wants to escape the dull dreariness of his everyday life and being reminded that he's going to die someday. And he does this through erotic passion. It's an erotic collection of poetry, and it focuses on travel, opium, and beautiful women as an escape from the drudgery of everyday life. And it also kind of treats women as a conduit between the spleen and the ideal, but it treats women in a slightly misogynistic fashion because women are seen as both a channel to a holy reward, like to get closer to God and pleasure and happiness, but they're also an easy route to go to hell very quickly and eternal damnation. And ultimately, the story follows the narrator through the cycle of a relationship with several different women. So there are these highs of sexual ecstasy that slowly break down as the two people in the relationship get to know each other better, and boredom and diffidence kind of sets in, until eventually the relationship falls apart and the two people who were in the relationship break up and realize that the only thing that they have waiting for them now is death and total emptiness. And so they start the cycle over again with a new lover. And Baudelaire makes a very special point throughout of trying to find something beautiful in bizarre and perverse things. And in one poem, he even describes decomposing flesh as something beautiful and artistic. So I had to do a little research. I didn't know anything about the Flowers of Evil off the top of my head, but when they described that, I went and looked it up, and I think it functions as a good simulacrum for not only what people go through in relationships with each other. You know, you kind of hear about the flash of attraction and passion and physically wanting each other, and then eventually that breaks down as they spend a lot of time together, too much time, they become too familiar with each other, and they get bored and eventually break up. And you could almost see this as like an omen or a warning sign of the kind of thing that could happen to even Bill and Ginny. Like they could just as easily be bored with one another in a few years as they could be in this torrid, passionate affair. So I just thought that was a really cool reference that the writers snuck in that was worth pursuing, I felt. I don't have anything big to say about it, but that was the end result of my little research.
I mean, I guess it does serve as a very accurate warning, or at least an intriguing one.
Mm-hmm. I think Greathouse, I mean, obviously he was using it to talk about his obsession with anal sex and possibly with BDSM, but that there's a different tie between Greathouse and Baudelaire's need to find something beautiful in the profane and terrible. There you go. There's my English degree paying off.
Hey.
Yay.
Paying off.
Yep. So let's talk about the need to escape and kind of how that.
Start with?
Okay, we'll start with Austin and Ginny.
I like Austin's little speech to Jenny at his, what I essentially call dorm room office, where he says, you just have to hit the gas and drive into the skid. I thought that was pretty emblematic of how he's lived his entire life, but I think notably because not only is he able to do that, he's not even getting punished for it. He's talking about how his wife has hired this amazing divorce attorney, and the kids are living up in Alton, and his life is really in shambles, but here he is putting up crepe paper and having this rager of a party. Meanwhile, Ginny is persona non grata.
Yeah, they're essentially being humiliated for the same thing, for perceived or publicized promiscuity, I suppose. But Ginny's transgressions in the grand scheme of things are much, much smaller. If anyone could prove at all that she had appeared in the video, she'd never actually done anything wrong, I guess. Whereas Austin has slept with his sister-in-law, a relative to him. Not a blood relative, granted, but a relative. And people still show up for his party and have a good time.
Well, and not only that, not only the scale of the action, but, Austin even tries to use his transgression to get ahead with other women. He's, putting Vivian's cast on, and they're talking, and he's trying to flirt, and he's saying, Vivian asks him straight out, did you actually sleep with your sister-in-law? And he kind of looks at her like, well.
And he frames it as his sister-in-law's problem. She was the one who instigated it. She trapped me.
Well, it was funny, too, between that and he's kind of looking at Vivian and thinking, yes, if you wanted me to, I will talk more about this. It's just, he's trying to spin it in the best possible light, even though there is no way to really come back from that kind of, I guess, humiliation, especially given how public it was.
Yeah. Bill and Ginny both need to escape the dramas of their lives, and they both very much retreat at the end of the episode into the fantasy, the four walls of the hotel and each other, which really embodies the whole reference to Baudelaire and the Flowers of Evil.
I think it's fascinating, too, because Bill, not only are they retreating, like you said, into each other with the hotel room and the constructed world they have there, but Bill is even pulling away and trying to escape on his own. You see him, after he talks to Vivian, just have that breakdown in the parking lot, a la Ginny last season. Really, I thought that was a character touch I don't think we've seen before. It's just Bill being alone with his thoughts and recognizing these emotions and not trying to push them down, but still trying to escape that same drama.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. Do you want to move on to the gender roles discussion?
I love talking about gender roles.
So, we're both very excited about the next episode, and from the vague, we don't know what's going to happen, from the vague, I guess, spoilers that the critics have given of the early screeners, it's going to get into not only Bill's past, and Ginny's past too, of course, but it's going to get into a discussion of gender roles and what that means for the two of them with each other, which is more fascinating to me, I think, now, thinking about it, than Bill revealing his past to Ginny, because that could be a really big character moment, like, oh, isn't this so dramatic, what happened to Bill, and isn't it just terrible, and Ginny comforts him, and it's just awful. I think it's a lot better, and it's a lot more something for them to come to this realization that essentially they sort of embody traits and attributes of each other's gender, like attributed societal gender role, if that makes sense.
I would say, gender mores or gender constructs, because, Jenny, particularly in this episode, she starts out by being very aggressive in the point where Bill is taken by surprise as to her passion and her points of logic, and saying, okay, great, House is trying to roust me out of this study. He doesn't have the right to do that. I developed this methodology with you. Don't dirty yourself by getting involved. I'm going to have to do it my own way.
Yeah, I thought that took me a while to figure that out. But because that was such a very strange thing for her to say, don't dirty yourself. But I realized later that it sounds like a mother telling her daughter not to go play in the mud and mess up her nice dress. Like, it's a very masculine. I think they are setting this episode up very, very carefully. And this is why I think we're going to look back on this episode and realize that this is a fantastic one, because Ginny is displaying all these masculine energies.
I think it's even more apparent, not just her and Bill, but between her and Lillian, because Lillian in this episode is the most, I would say, traditionally feminine we've ever seen her without appearing feminine in any way. She's very hesitant. She's unsure of herself. She doesn't have that self-confidence. She's emotional. She cries. She needs direction and someone to guide her. And then here's Ginny just blazing in. I just thought that was a really interesting dynamic, especially because it doesn't focus on appearance for either of them. You know, they're still dressed the same. It's not like a makeover episode, but it flips their entire friendship on its head.
And I really feel like energies is the best word to use, because it's not like Ginny has become the man in their relationship. She's still very much herself. It's just it's the force that she's using to get things done.
Well, and it's that same single-mindedness, but expressed in such a forceful way that we're not used to.
Mm-hmm. Other attributes or other things that circle around this idea of Ginny being aggressive or being more, I guess, dynamic is being seen as, like, Austen essentially says, we're equal, we're the same.
We're lone wolves.
We're lone wolves. She also claims Lillian as her equal, and Lillian, we know, is very, she's a non-traditional woman. She's gone out and found herself a career. She can't really find one singular place to hang out with. She's not welcome among the secretaries or the nurses or the doctors. And I even put, like, maybe Ginny was avoiding ousting Barbara because she didn't want to be seen as a secretary, a traditionally feminine woman's area again.
That's interesting. I didn't really think about it that way. I assumed not even just as simple as saw Barbara, saw the chaos, and decided not to do it. I think you're right. I think it may be conscious or unconscious, but she would definitely not want to step right back into that role.
Bill is kind of expressing not the opposite, but sort of a different side of it. He's really portrayed as having more feminine energies this episode. So he actually, like, actively insists on female agency. He literally says, what does that mean? Whatever life Rose chooses, and that's her decision. And he talks about the fact that she's of age and she doesn't owe her mother any obligation to listen to her, essentially.
Well, and we mentioned earlier his breakdown after talking with Vivian, his feelings about not just Barton, but making a fresh start at this new hospital. I think, too, one of the things that I noticed on rewatch, even at home, he's become more of, not a pacifist necessarily, but he's the person trying not to make waves, because, the first scene we have of him at home, he walks out of his bedroom, still getting dressed, finds a stranger in his living room and goes, "Oh, what?" And there's no real outrage or Libby, I demand explanation for this thing that is happening. I need my shirt. I need these things. It's just him course-correcting very tiny things. Call me doctor. Don't call me mister. I still need my shirt that's not hanging in the bedroom, but he's really trying not to rock the boat there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is, of course, the direct and overt sympathizing with Rose, who is a woman who has women's problems. So you really get the clearest picture of Bill as, someone who actively specializes in women's problems, and you definitely see a connection there. I think we can agree that this episode is getting us ready for the interrogation and examination of the gender politics between Bill and Ginny that we will inevitably, most certainly see in the next episode, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it, because I just hope, I don't think it'll be a happy ending, because of course it won't be, but I just kind of hope that they reach a better understanding of kind of what each of them brings to the table and what they're most comfortable with expressing both for themselves and what they're comfortable with the other expressing, if that makes sense.
Can we just get 10 minutes of connection?
Can we just get you two to understand that Bill needs to be emotional and empathetic, and Ginny needs to be in charge, and then everything will be okay.
Everything will work out great.
I mean, it's not a perfect swap, of course. Bill has this big ego that needs to be stroked, and Ginny needs to, she she likes to, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's not a perfect role reversal or anything. I mean, it's just not a black and white issue, I think.
And it's not sitcom-ish. It's not, I'm thinking of the I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ricky switch jobs and, they both prove to be terrible at it, so then they just go back to the way that things were. It's not, like you said, it's not that simple. It's not so straightforward as I want to do X instead of doing Y. It's just a conflation of all the things and the little microaggressions that they've been told or have been quietly resenting their entire lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think Bill is going to become super sensitive and emotional and cry on Ginny's shoulder all the time. I think it's just going to be, a step forward in further understanding. And I think it's really going to get into a big difference in how they treat each other in public and their private life. That was never more clear than when they were in the office in front of Barb and she called him Dr. Masters and he called her Mrs. Johnson. And there's this, very formal language at play, whereas in private they could be completely different people and then go back to work and put on these fronts again and, be forced to wear the mask. Okay. Yeah, and of course we're setting up Bill and Ginny's odd pass, which will be very devastating, and I can't wait to see how they play out those scenes, because I think that's going to be some really good material for the actors.
I would love that. It's going to be so good.
It's going to be so good. Do we want to end with some random thoughts that didn't fit in anywhere else?
I would love it.
You go first.
Well, and I think this was pretty obvious to most people in different reviews. The conversations, the scene swapping between Dr. Greathouse and Bill in Memorial, and then Ginny and Dr. Dittmer in Maternity, the way that they blocked that scene, it was essentially one continuous sex scene. It cracked me up because the first part that I noticed of it was the cigarette after they have, it's Dr. Dittmer and Ginny in Maternity in his office, and he has pulled an SNL and jizzed in his pants over talking about Ulysses. And it cuts immediately to Dr. Greathouse with a cigarette in his mouth, like, well, that was excellent. And so that was the first thing that I noticed. But then on the rewatch, I went back, and it brings everybody through the four distinct phases, essentially. You have Greathouse and Bill talking about the tax code language of the study, and it takes it on up through the bell curve and then drops it back down at the end with Bill and Greathouse, and Greathouse's obsession and fixation on anal sex and Barbara.
Yeah.
So I just had kind of an endless laugh about that. One of my other notes was it keeps talking, the Scullys whipping around Europe and taking this vacation in an attempt for Barton to put himself back together. My personal feeling, although obviously they had to get the actors out off screen for a while, but I assume that Scully was probably in some sort of Freudian institution or medical facility in Europe, and that Margaret is either mailing postcards randomly or she's just going around Europe by herself. They're not traveling around like tourists.
That's a close read of it. I like that.
I don't know. I thought it was interesting, and it didn't make sense to me that they would just go on vacation. So maybe it'll prove to be true, maybe not. But that seemed more logical to me than some sort of trip down the river of denial.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned this before, but if we haven't, Melinda Page Hamilton guest starred as Rose's mother. The last time we saw her was as Don Draper's friend Anna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a nice little surprise. I didn't recognize. Actually, I did recognize her at first because I just couldn't place the actress's name. But I noticed her, and she's got a very different affect going here. She's a completely different character, even though it's funny that it's all in that same time period.
I think some of it, too, is the way that they style the actors and actresses, because Betsy Brandt, I didn't recognize her at all, and I knew that she was going to be playing a significant role in this season, but it took me until the rewatch to look at Barb and go, oh my god, behind those glasses, it's you!
Yeah. Should I do mine?
Go for it.
So, in the previews at the start of this episode, there was a short little clip of Essie talking to Bill, and she was wearing the same coat, and it was the same setup as the previous episode where he tells her that he and Virginia have sex regularly and he has no plans to stop. Well, apparently, she had a line where she told him that he would wind up alone if he continued with this behavior. And it was cut from the premiere because when he tells her that, she doesn't say anything at all. It's definitely not in the premiere episode. So, what I got out of that is that in this episode, both Bill and Ginny are told by others that if they continue this behavior, they will end up alone, which is very, very interesting because they do wind up alone, but they wind up alone together. And then in the hotel scene, Bill calls Ginny his research partner, and that's very specific language that he uses. And it's kind of hard to hear because Ginny interrupts and talks over him because she's getting all whipped up and outraged about how she can't join him at Memorial. But he's starting to get more respectful and professional and to elevate her through her titles. First, she was his research assistant. Then she was his research associate. He used that word to describe her one time. Now she is his research partner. Of course, in more ways than one, but that seems very equal, like a business partner in a way, which I thought was nice.
Well, that's an interesting use of language, too, like you said.
Yeah.
It's got that double meaning.
Mm-hmm. And then I was, not to make a huge deal out of this, but I kind of wanted to know what's up with Barbara. I know they wouldn't just cast Betsy Brandt for no reason in this role. I don't think it's like other guest starring roles. Like, they kind of made a big deal out of it, out of the casting. When Betty walks out of reception, Barbara's just kind of standing near the desk. And when Ginny walks in, literally moments later, she's on the floor dealing with a huge pile of upset folders. And it made me wonder if she's suffering from some kind of medical problem, like a balance issue. We're supposed to see her as clumsy and unworthy of working for Bill, because she's not up to his standards. But that felt very pointed to me. Like, suddenly she's on her hands and knees, and there's this massive pile of file folders around her, and it focuses on that for a bit. So I'm wondering if there's something wrong with her that they will eventually find out about.
I didn't take it as something being wrong with her, but when you talked about Great House and potential predilections for BDSM, that actually is what made that particular blocking click in my mind. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if that's going to be where we essentially take this character, if she sort of takes us into maybe the world of sexual dysfunction through those two.
Yeah, that's possible.
I don't know.
Anything might happen. We've only just met her, so we'll be interested to see where that goes. And then I got the feeling that Lillian refused to say her name in the PSA because she knows that she can't enunciate her own name anymore.
I wondered if she'd forgotten it completely outright.
That's also possible.
Because and Julianne Nicholson in that scene, I just want her to submit this for an Emmy because the look on her face, that panic, and the way she tries to keep it tamped down was brilliant.
I think it was interesting the way they filmed that because when she starts screwing up the words, the camera flips to what you would see as the retro vintage film effect and the audio goes off, so you can't really tell if she's mangling her words in the first place. It takes that little bit of dialogue between the director and Ginny to really understand that something has gone wrong.
And I think that's what makes it so great because it's it's almost like a sleight of hand trick where you see her and her presentation is correct and she looks the part and she sounds the part until you start listening to what she's actually saying, and at that point it's just off the rails insane. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also thought it was concerning that she suddenly said that she wanted pizza, not because it might have been a bit of word salad, but because she says, I don't even like pizza, let's go get some. To me, that kind of wrong craving just really felt weird, even above and beyond the metastasis to her brain. It's like it's rewriting her personality or something.
And that made me wonder if she was going to have some sort of brain event that would precipitate her death, if it was going to be like a stroke that killed her or something just very quick and sudden where, you don't really have the time to prepare for it, but there are just those tiny few warning signs.
I thought Austin's name drop about his kids living in Alton was an unfortunate incident of the writers showing their brushstrokes. It was kind of painfully obvious that he's going to be the one to figure out that Bill and Ginny are having an affair. I mean, come on. Oh, yes, my kids are living in Alton, Illinois, just across the river, across the street from the Chancery Park Hotel. My goodness, what a lovely hotel that is.
What a nice section of town. I hope I don't see anyone I know there.
Gosh, that sure would be a nice place to have an affair. And then just last little bit, I got a mutually taking care of each other vibe from the last bit where Bill carries Ginny's suitcase and she takes his arm. It's a nice little gentlemanly bit of mannerism, but at the same time, they really do need each other for this escape, for this respite from the rest of the world.
And I think it shows the unique position they're both in, that they can provide what feels like a true escape and not just an escape through a couple of rounds of passion and sex or just general time spent together. But there's that element of, you know, I want to take care of you. I want to help you in different ways. And obviously there are things that are just as problematic about those things. But yeah, I guess I also find it intriguing is the point that I'm trying to make.
One last random thought. As far as the gender roles go, I realized late this afternoon, the season key art, the famous picture that's being passed around that's on the billboards and stuff, that's in all the ads of them in bed together, embracing each other or holding each other, I guess. The way that they're positioned has them kind of, their roles swapped in a way. Ginny is higher up. She's positioned, like the top of her head is positioned higher, and she is, like, they're both got their arms around each other, but she's holding him. Like, she's got the more masculine affect going, I guess. I'm afraid that I'm using the wrong words. I don't know the right words to use, but she's in the more prominent position, I guess, and he's kind of
it's the
relaxing.
Liminal position, I guess.
It's the what?
The liminal position of their bodies, because I'm envisioning the poster right now, and typically, you know, you think of masculine energy, men take up more space with their bodies, and men are positioned, you know, a little bit higher than women. Not always, obviously, but generally men are taller, men are bigger, men appear to outshadow ladies in pictures, or just generally. I don't know.
I think it's not just that, but Bill has a very feminine set of qualities going on. He's not only lower than her in the picture, I think he's like on his side, and he's got his head balanced on her shoulder, whereas she's on her back, I think. It's the positioning. It's very subtle, but I really think it's deliberate.
Well, and that's the liminal use of space again. You know, Ginny taking up more space, being confident, Bill trying to take up as little space as possible and really leaning into her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
That's nice analysis there.
Do you want to close out this episode?
Well, once again, this has been an episode of Masters of Podcasting. As always, if you guys have any questions or anything you want us to talk about in the next episode, drop us a line on Tumblr.
Thanks so much for listening.